Hi. All right, Ecclesiastes chapter 11, and of course we're getting very close to finishing out the book here. But let's go ahead and read through. It's a short chapter. Let's start Ecclesiastes 11. Cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for thou knowest not what evil shall be upon the earth. If the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if the tree fall toward the south or toward the north, in the place where the tree falleth, there it shall be. He that observeth the wind shall not sow, and he that regardeth the clouds shall not reap. As thou knowest not what is the way of the Spirit, nor how the bones do grow in the womb of her that is with child, even so thou knowest not the works of God who maketh all. In the morning sow thy seed, and in the evening withhold not thine hand, for thou knowest not whether shall prosper, or either this or that, or whether they both shall be alike good. Truly the light is sweet, and a pleasant thing it is for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man live many years and rejoice in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that cometh is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in thy youth, and let thy heart cheer thee in the days of thy youth, and walk in the ways of thine heart, and in the sight of thine eyes. But know thou that for all these things God will bring thee into judgment. Therefore remove sorrow from thy heart, and put away evil from thy flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. I want to begin with a quote here tonight by J.S. Wright. He said, the teacher is approaching the climax of his book. We cannot see God's whole plan, and there is nothing in this world that we can build on so as to find satisfaction or the key to the meaning of things. Yet, we are to fulfill God's purpose by accepting our daily lot in life as from Him, and by thus pleasing Him, make each day a good day. And so that, honestly, that could kind of sum up the theme of Ecclesiastes, as it were. But with that kind of thought in mind, we begin to look at this chapter. And so, interestingly enough, as Solomon is winding down his book, he begins chapter 11 taking a look at, the best word for it is investing. Investing as a way to make a day a good day, or as Wright just said. Now, it is debated whether or not Solomon is talking about actual investment of money, or whether he's talking about some other kind of investment. I mean, it could be charity, it could be time, it could be effort, whatever you could invest something of yourself into. But I don't think it honestly matters, because when you read through what he says about it, the principle applied to any of it. It could be applied to money or time or effort, whatever the case may be. And so the principles themselves are good. And so he says there in verse 1, he says, cast thy bread upon the waters, for thou shalt find it after many days. So by casting your bread upon the water, what you're doing is you're giving up something of value, but you're doing the expectation of return, which is what an investment is, right? You're giving up something of value with the expectation of a return. And then verse 2 shows us the value of diversifying what it is you actually cast, or what it is you actually invest, or to use the common vernacular, don't place all your eggs in the same basket, right? Now, obviously, we understand that from an investment portfolio mindset, right? I mean, you hear these kinds of things, you got to diversify. We hear that all the time. But even from other principles or other investment standpoints, this principle applies. And as I was thinking about this, I was just kind of thinking about myself and thinking about the various roles in which God has placed me. And so I could spend all of my time and focus, every second of my day, I could spend all of my time and focus on the church and on the study of the Word of God and everything, and doing all the things that a pastor, think about, but to the neglect of my family. Right? And so if I spend all of my time investing in this one area, I'm neglecting another very important area. In fact, the biggest and most important area of my life. Investing in my family is the most important thing that I can do in the position that God has placed me. But also I can't invest solely in my family to the neglect of the church, because this is another obviously very important role in which God has placed me. And so we can't just spend all of our times, focusing on one specific area to the neglect of others, because very few people, if anybody, has God ever, given them just one sole area of focus where they don't have, other things that they're in charge of or other things that they need to be doing. And so, don't, diversify. I mean, that's a common term, we hear it all the time, but it does apply. Now, when it comes to investments, again, of any kind, there are inevitable doubts that arise. Solomon says, don't wait for perfect conditions, but simply work hard, do what's right, and just wait for, to use the term, for the dividends. After all, there are things we can't change. He gives the illustration of a tree. You cut down a tree, you're not going to change where it falls. That tree is going to fall, right? And so this is the way in which investing works. Now, again, trying to place this into kind of a modern context, or I'll even say a Christian context. You can have Christians say, well, I've spent years and years and years praying on this one particular thing, and it still hasn't come to pass. I'm just going to stop. Or, I've spent years and years witnessing to this individual. I've spent years and years reading the Bible, and I don't feel like I've grown, or I still struggle with the sin, or whatever the case may be, so I'm just going to quit. No, Solomon says, don't wait for the perfect conditions. Just keep working hard, keep moving forward, keep doing what you know is right. And so if we waited to work or act until we had all the facts, or until those conditions were just perfect, we would really never begin, because only God knows the perfect conditions. He's the creator. He's over all. Solomon says, even so thou knowest not the works of God who maketh all. And so we, in light of these uncertainties, again, we put down our heads and we work. You keep going. You keep doing the things that God has asked you to do. In fact, we had a good example of this recently, where we went to, we had been praying for Brian Burchett for a while. As the father of a former church member here, and we went to his funeral last Saturday, the week before, whenever that was. And he and his wife had been married for 48 years. And for 48 years, she had been praying for him to come to know Christ. For day in and day out, for him to know Christ. And I was talking to his son at the funeral, and he said, and he was kind of admitting he wasn't boasting about this. He got to the point where I'd given up. He said, Dad is too stubborn. It's just never going to happen. But thankfully, his mom just kept praying day in and day out. Now, she could have, after a year, she could have thrown up her hands and said, you know what, I've been praying about this every day for a year. God, this is in your will. If you want to be done, just do it. I'm done with this. I'm not praying. But she kept working. She just kept going. She kept praying. And this is exactly what we're called to do as Christians. I'll quote Kidner. He said, it is a stimulus call with no thought of faltering, yet no trace of bravado or responsibility. The very smallness of our knowledge and control, the very likelihood of hard times, as he mentions in verse 2, so frequently impressed on us throughout the book, because the reasons to bestir ourselves and show some spirit. And so, do we expect difficulty? Absolutely we expect difficulty. That's just part of life. Again, but you put down your head and you just keep going. And this is not only true in our physical investments, but obviously it's true in our spiritual as well. And a good text for this is what we see in Ephesians chapter 5. See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time. Why? Specifically because the days are evil. And if the days are evil, we as Christians can expect difficulty. We as Christians can expect roadblocks and trials and heartache. But that's not an excuse for the Christian to throw in the towel and say, well, I've done all that I can do. No, Paul just says what? Redeem the time. Redeem the time. Keep working. Keep going at it. There's no excuse for stopping. And then we get to verse 7, and he kind of switches course here and begins to give us a small look at honestly where the whole book is going to end at the end of chapter 12. But verse 7, it says, truly the light is sweet, and a pleasant thing it is for the eyes to behold the sun. And so he kind of, I don't want to get ahead of myself. Let me read this quote. Thomas Constable, here's what he said. In chapter 1, verse 12 through chapter 6, verse 9, Solomon demonstrated that all work is ultimately unsatisfying for two reasons. It does not yield anything really permanent under the sun, and we can never be sure that we will enjoy the fruits of our labor before we die. In chapter 6, verse 10 through chapter 11, verse 6, he pointed out that we can never be sure which of our efforts will succeed because we do not know God's plans or what the future holds. And then in chapter 11, verse 7 through chapter 12, verse 14, the end of the book, he emphasized how to live acceptably before God in view of these realities. And so Solomon, even if you don't really, and it's difficult to see in Ecclesiastes at the time, but even if you don't see how he's building upon previous truths, that's what he's been doing. And so here we begin to see that in chapter 11, verse 7 through the end of the book. And so Solomon here, he points out the beauty in life and joy in living that life. But he cautions us to remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that cometh is vanity. And so on one hand, right, enjoy the fruits of your labor, enjoy the goodness of God, enjoy the good things that God gives. But this isn't a eat, drink, and be merry kind of message. That's not what he's saying. And so the life that God has given us should be a joyful thing. And I'll just add this, there should be no more joyful person than a Christian, right? A Christian should have more joy than anybody. Christians should be living a life of rejoicing and joyfulness more than anybody else in this world. But we only get one, and that's what we have to remember. We only get one. And even though for the Christian, life beyond the grave is going to be far better, we need to remember that this life, and to live this life with joy the way that God intended us to live it. And so I'll add to that this. I have said in the past, and I still hold to this, I'm not changing my opinion on this, I have said in the past that I am not a big fan of the phrase, you can be so heavenly minded you're no earthly good, right? Maybe you've heard that phrase. I'm not the biggest fan of that phrase because I've said in the past and still believe those who are the most heavenly minded will do the most earthly good. I do believe that. However, there is a sense where you have to be heavenly minded in the right way. Perhaps you've known somebody like this, and I'm not going to name any names here, but Beth and I have both known people who get to a certain point in their life as Christians. I'm not talking about non-believers. They get to a certain point in their life where they have endured tragedy, they have endured difficulty and hardships, and they get to the point where they literally just want to die. They don't want to live anymore. They don't care about anybody. It's not, and that maybe sounds, but the only thing they care about now is just dying and going to heaven. And the reason they feel that way is because they know where they're going. They know what their future holds, and they know it's going to be better there. And so I understand that inclination. But we as Christians don't just get to say, God, I don't care how much life you have left for me. I don't care about living it anymore. I just want to die. No, we live the life that God gives to us, and we live it with joy. And yes, I know that might entail some hardships, and I know that might be difficult for some people, and I know people endure a whole lot more than others. But we only have this one life, and God has given us this life for a reason and for a purpose. He sent his son to die to redeem this life that we've been given. And so we ought to live it with joy, and we ought to live it the way God intended. And so with that kind of mindset, Solomon commands us then to rejoice and to cheer in the days of thy youth, and to walk in the ways of thine heart and in the sight of thine eyes. And so in other words, he wants us to have freedom in our rejoicing, but that freedom should always be tempered by the fact that God will bring thee into judgment. And so where he ends chapter 11 is ultimately where he's going to end the whole book. And I know that maybe is an odd way to kind of frame this mindset of rejoicing, the judgment of God. But this is what Solomon does, and this is where he's going to end the whole book with this theme of judgment. He says, God will bring thee into judgment. Now get this, therefore, verse 10, remove sorrow from thy heart and put away evil from thy flesh, for childhood and youth are vanity. And so specifically because God is coming in judgment, therefore remove sorrow. Because God's coming to judge, live joyfully. Live righteously, but live joyfully, right? Live the life that God intends you to live. And God doesn't intend you to live this dour, down on your luck, sour. Nobody wants to be around that person because they drag everybody else down. That's not how God intends you to live. And by the way, that's not giving an accurate picture of who Christ was. Christ was the type of individual everybody's like, man, that guy's, he's always down and he's never happy and he's never smiling. No, Jesus drew crowds everywhere he went. He was the kind of person that everybody wanted to be around. And so we have to understand, the approaching this. And so, and I'll end by saying this. This was not, as I mentioned earlier, this is not Solomon's promotion of sinful indulgence. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying go do whatever you want and be happy. No, live righteously, and in the midst of that righteousness, live joyfully, right? And so it's not sinful indulgence, but the call to genuinely enjoy the good life given by God. To genuinely enjoy the good life given by God. And I'll close with this text in 1 Corinthians, because Paul was dealing with kind of a very similar mindset, a very similar situation with the Corinthians. And so he says in 1 Corinthians 6, he's kind of refuting a mantra that existed within the Corinthian church, right? And so the Corinthians said, all things are lawful unto me. Basically to say, I can do what I have freedom as a Christian, and therefore I can go and do and live however I want. Christ is, and so I might as well go, make good on that payment, right? And so they said all things to me. Paul says, but all things are not expedient, right? Yes, we have freedom in Christ, but that doesn't mean go do whatever you want, because some things are detrimental to your Christian walk. The Corinthians said, all things are lawful to me, but then Paul says, but I will not be brought under the power of any. And so there's a sense in which, yes, we have freedom, and there should be rejoicing, but it must be tempered by righteousness. It must be tempered by grace. It must be tempered by sanctification. All of these things have to be kept in mind, never thrown out the window. But the good news is that you don't have to throw those things out the window, and you can still live a joyful, rejoicing life in Christ because of what he's done for us. Now, obviously, we have the benefit of a New Testament perspective. Solomon is looking forward. Solomon is writing about hope and rejoicing. I should say he's writing about rejoicing in the hope of what the Messiah would come and do. We can talk about rejoicing knowing what the Messiah came and did. We can talk about this knowing the realities of the life that we live now in light of Calvary, in light of what Christ has done for us, and in light of the forgiveness of sins that we have because of Calvary. And so the truths of Ecclesiastes are not changed because of the New Testament. They're actually made even more clear. We even have a better rejoicing that can be found in the New Testament because of what happened at Calvary. And so, he's setting us up to bring us to his grand conclusion here in chapter 12. And that'll be, I think, probably seen more clearly as we finish out the book next week. Okay, before